We're all chasing something. It's the pursuit, finding ourselves in travel and satiating our souls with our craft. My craft is photography. I'm searching for the perfect tool for me. My path has shifted from SLRs to rangefinders, Nikon to Leica. And this is me, Finding Leica.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Max Shoots Film. Okay, today, another episode of Finding Leica, all about the Leica M5. My collection of Leicas has changed over the short time with the Leica system, and that's exactly what the Finding Leica series is about. It's about my experience getting into the Leica family and figuring it all out. Now, I started out with the M4P in November of 2019, bought a Leica M6 in April of 2020, and now I've picked up a pair of M5s. And we'll go into the reasoning behind all of that very soon. So let's talk about this video and how it's all broken down. First of all, I've bookmarked each section of this video below so you can click and go to just the section that you want to watch. So we'll go to an on-location shoot where I actually run the M5. Let's see the images we can produce with it, what it's like to run it. And then the next section, we'll come back here and do a tabletop review. So since that on-location shoot, I put probably about 15 rolls through the Leica M5, so I feel in a pretty good spot to give solid advice on what it's like to run this. And, you know, having shot the M6, over 100 rolls through this M6 in about 9 months, 8, 9 months, I'm in a good position to talk about those differences as well. So I hope you enjoy the video. Feel free to skip ahead if you like, but let's go shoot this guy. See you right back here. Okay, what do I have in this package? It came from Japan, so that'll tell you something. What we got? Please don't be an empty box. That's why I open all of these on video. Uh-oh. All right, let's see. Oh, man. It is in mint condition. Look at that thing. That is freaking mint condition. It is big. That is a large camera. Oh man, that viewfinder is freaking bright. I can't wait to shoot this. Oh my God. Okay, so I've been walking around downtown Tempe with the M5. So things I'm quickly noticing are, of course, the metering system. There is a meter across the bottom, and there's one bar where you need to be, and a slanted bar that you can go to that bar by adjusting the aperture or the shutter speed. So that's new to me, lining those up. And sometimes it is difficult to see. Also, let's talk about the meter. This thing is like a spot meter, literally. So I'll put it on a very small, bright area, and if I move it just a hair into a dark area, it's picking it up. It's not very wide, but I have to move into that dark area to trigger it. The dark area doesn't impact it, meaning it's a spot meter. Also, this meter on this is on an arm, so if you start to slightly press the meter, that meter is going to drop down and it's going to receive a shadow from the inside of the frame of the camera. So you have to remember, when you're metering with the M5, don't slightly press the shutter down or you'll start to get inaccurate readings, and you may adjust your metering based off of inaccurate information. One last thing before I start shooting again, it is a large camera. It feels very different in hand. It's like I'm holding a remember when we used to rent videos from Blockbuster, the plastic boxes that they came in? That's what this feels like. One that's just cut in half. That's exactly what it feels like. But I love carrying it with the 2 lugs. I'm carrying it cross body, and I don't notice the weight at all. All right, let's go shoot some film. right? So I don't want to admit it. When I first started running the M5, I was disappointed. It was really weird to run. But now I've been in situations where I'm forced to get the exposure very fast, planes flying overhead, and I'm starting to like it. We'll see, guys. The light is amazing. So there you go, running the M5. Now that was my first time really running the M5 other than just a test roll to make sure that the cameras worked. Since that video was recorded, that shoot was recorded, I've ran about 15 rolls through it, so I feel pretty good about it. All right, so let's just jump right into it. I'm gonna cover the things that I feel are important to know if you're shopping for an M5, coming from another rangefinder system, or within the Leica system, and just all around general knowledge that you should be aware of if you're considering a purchase of an M5. All right, so let's jump right into it. This camera's pretty old. It's rare that I own a camera older than me, especially one that I run as hard as I've run this Leica M5. This camera came out in 1971. It was the successor to the M4. It wasn't very popular, as you may have heard on the internet. It ran production for about 4 years. Then they shut it off and they went back to the M4s and they made the M4 II after that. And then I think the M4P, then the M6. Someone please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. There was 2 variants of this. When they first came out, they had just a 2-lug, right? And exactly as the name states, there's just 2 lugs, but they're on one side, not a lug here and a lug here, so you can wear it like that. This is a larger camera, so they designed it to where, you know, both straps are on one side and you can wear it like on your left side, pull it up. I wear it crossbody. I love that. Apparently this was a point of contention, and Leica responded after I think a year or so and added a 3rd lug. I don't particularly like the 3-lug. First of all, this is lower, so like your top strap will be here and this will be here. It's really weird, but the 3-lug, from what I understand, the research I've done, is more desirable because it's newer components, right? Some people think that maybe when they updated and added a 3rd lug, some other issues were resolved in this updated model. I have no clue. I've shot both of them. They feel the exact same other than the lug orientation. I do like the 2-lug better also because at least you have one clean side, right? That I don't have to worry about a strap getting entangled with my hand. So, super limited production as well. I think there was about 23,000 black Leica M5s made and almost 11,000 chrome Leica M5s made. A couple other notes about the variants and the manufacturing of this camera. The M5 was the last of the adjust and fit, right? So there was a bunch of parts and they adjusted it and fitted each one, I'm assuming, and made, it's almost like a custom camera. Sure, they had standard parts, but someone adjusted it so everything fit perfectly, as opposed to the correct and replace model in the M4 II onward, right? More brass components internally in the M5 and lower, as opposed to precision milled steel parts. That's what I've read on the internet. definitely correct that in the comments if it's incorrect. So when Leica came out with it, of course, it was much larger than the M4 at the time, right? And it was a departure from that classic style. And you'll see here, it is larger than the M6, and it's a pretty different camera from the M6. I'll do a comparison video, the M6 to the M5. They're really different cameras. They run a lot different as well. It's a different experience. It feels like a Leica, but it's much different. All right, so now we've got the manufacturing out of the way and the variants out of the way. Let's just jump into the individual components of this camera that are important to shooting. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the viewfinder. So it was inspired by the M4 viewfinder, basically the same viewfinder. It is 0.72 magnification. It's definitely the brightest one I've seen, the brightest viewfinder. I've owned the M4P, the M6, and now 2 M5s. I just think it's brighter. Is that true? I'm not sure. It sure feels like it. One thing you're definitely going to notice the moment you put an M5 to your eye is the viewfinder experience is much different than the M6 onward. The viewfinder in the M5 has a horizontal bar across the bottom that is lit by this top light bar here. That's where your meter readout is. There is a vertical line where your exposure needs to be based on shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. And there is a diagonal line that you can move back and forth by adjusting shutter speed or aperture. And the goal is to line them up, and then you have what's considered perfect exposure. Also within the viewfinder in the bottom left, you can see your shutter speed, which is amazing, right? I always know what aperture I want to be at depending on the scene. If I'm shooting, you know, a subject like portraits, I'm going to be at shallower aperture, so I'll set it to like f2 or f2.8, and then I adjust around the shutter speed. With the M5, you never have to take the camera from your eye. If your aperture's set, take it to your eye, move the bar, you can see your shutter speed, and you know if you're getting into an area of low shutter speed that might introduce camera shake, making a blurry image. So I think that's pretty helpful because I hate pulling it down. Of course, you can remember where you're at on the wheel by counting your clicks back, but in the middle of a shoot, that's the last thing I want to do. Give me the information in the display. It took me a minute to get used to that because it's pretty busy. In a Leica M6, you know, it's pretty much just the viewfinder, the lines, the frame lines, and the rangefinder patch with a little meter at the bottom. That meter in the M6, when you put a new battery in it, or if you're in relatively low light, it can be blindingly bright. So that is one con on the M6 meter, but it's stupid simple. The M5, I can play around a lot with exposure. I know how many stops under and over I am visually, quickly, easily, right? And I know where my shutter speed is, and there's a lot of information in the display. Now this camera works without a battery, and that's the only time I think it would be weird to have all that in there, because now it's inactive, it's just a distraction. So it would be weird without a battery, but the good news is, of course, it is mechanical and it would run without a battery. So in that viewfinder, you'll also see, of course, your frame lines. There are 4 frame lines in the Leica M5, 35, 50, 90, and 135 millimeter. The 35 millimeter and 135 lines are shared in the display. Inner lines, smaller 135, larger 35 outer. The 50 millimeter frame lines, when you attach your 50 millimeter lens, it automatically selects the 50 millimeter lines. What's cool about the 50 millimeter lines are, of course, it has the frame for what the 50 millimeter frame will look like, but it also has these little like parentheses around the rangefinder patch that basically tell you the width of the spot meter. Yeah, it's a spot meter, and you know what you can put that patch on to effectively meter, which is really cool. And then of course the 90 is by itself as well. It's a little dotted line box, super helpful. Okay, so let's talk about the meter in this guy. The meter is absolutely the strangest thing I've ever seen, but it's actually ingenious, right? Leica had to figure out how to cram a meter into a rangefinder, and It is a TTL meter. It measures through the lens. It's not flash TTL. It is through the lens metering, just like the M6 is through the lens metering. There is a M6 TTL, which means it's through the lens flash metering. So it's pretty easy to confuse all of that, and I understand. So this meter's crazy in that in the M6, it takes a reflective reading. There's a little white patch there. I don't know if you can see that, but what it does is the meter points towards that white patch and takes a reflective reading, and that way we don't have to worry about the depth of the lens that's going in and worry about hitting the meter. And what am I talking about hitting the meter? Well, the M5 has an arm that when the shutter is cocked, a meter on an arm pops up where that white dot is in the Leica M6, and that is constantly reading through the lens there. When you go to fire the shutter, it falls down out of the way, releases the shutter, and you've made your exposure. The awesome thing about it is it's a little 8mm basically surface area, so it is basically just like a spot meter. One thing you need to think about is when you are exposing, looking through the viewfinder and setting your exposure, do not put your finger on the shutter and apply any pressure, because as you apply pressure, the arm starts to move downward out of the way and you can get an incorrect reading. So very strange, but I guess it's genius for that time. It is. So let's talk about the shutter speed dial, because for me it was exponentially different than the M6 super tiny, super far back shutter dial and the M4P that I owned. The M5 shutter dial is exceptionally large, and it hangs off the edge just enough where it's really easy to change the shutter speed without having to reach too far back and worry about manipulating the camera. Like when I'm exposing a shot with my Leica M6, my finger goes way back to get that wheel. Of course, I'm saying way back being dramatic. It's not terribly far back, but it is a reach. And the Leica M6 is a small camera, so I'm constantly moving the camera. The M5 is a larger camera. I have larger hands, so it just feels really nice. Now, when I first saw this shutter speed wheel, I thought it looked really cheap and hokey. But thankfully, of course, in true Leica fashion, they made it exceptionally robust, and it's satisfyingly clicky, very much so. It only goes up to 1,000th of a second. That's just Leica's jam with the cloth shutters. But it does have this weird bulb setting where you can go bulb 1, 2, 4, 8, 15, and 30. Those are seconds. That allows you to, when you're metering, if you get into that territory and you get proper exposure, the angled line over top of the straight line at B30, that means you would need to set a 30-second exposure and manually hold it for 30 seconds. So you're able to read up to bulb 30-second readings, but the shutter is not connected to that bulb setting of 30 seconds. You would need some type of plunger to do that. But what's cool is at least you can meter up to that. But it's weird. I don't think I'll ever use that. I shoot in pretty bright, harsh desert light most of the time, so I don't anticipate having to do that. But if I needed some long exposures or night photography, it's good to know it's there and you can meter that. So let's talk about loading film. While we're on the bottom, let's talk about the film rewind real quick. So to initiate with rewinding the film, when you're done, you've shot 24, 36 exposures. Of course, you drop this guy down, that releases the spool, and then you come over here, and the rewind's on the bottom recessed and flat, as opposed to the M6 where it's up on the top left and angled. Also, this is a ratcheted rewind, which is amazing because, if your hand slips off, it's not gonna spin around, and I hate when that happens on an SLR or even on my Leica M6. So it's ratcheted, it stores that last click, so if your hand slips off, you're still there, which is nice. And then it closes, folds away, and a nice smooth bottom, and there is your plate release with your tripod mount there. And it's the traditional loading system that is on the M4 onward. just as quick and easy to load as the M4s and the M6s. So let's talk about batteries. This unfortunately takes the old Mercury 1.35 volt batteries. You would use just like a nickel or something to open that up. Now, to work around that, you can use one of these guys, a zinc air cell, wean cell, and you can get those online, B&H, Amazon has them as well, and that solves that problem. And you can also get an adapter, I think it's like an MR9. I'll put all this stuff down in the description so it's easy for you to look it up after the video. But the MR9 basically is the shell of this, and you can use a traditional like LR44 1.55 volt battery, and it will step it down to a constant 1.35, I think is what this, let me check my notes. Yeah, 1.35 volt is what this requires. So just remember that when you're buying an M5, if you ordered it online and it arrives, if you don't have a battery, you may not be shooting the moment you open that box. Okay, I'll keep the list of pros and cons relatively short, and these are just my pros and cons. Everyone brings to their photographic experience a different set of needs and wants, so your list may vary. This is just my experience so far. First of all, from a pro standpoint, the meter definitely is an advantage for me. And when I shot digital weddings and portraits, I used the spot meter exclusively. I love being able to tell the camera, ignore everything else in the frame. This thing that I'm pointing you at is the subject. This is all I care about. I need to know what is the exposure for that face. I'll put it like on the eye or the cheekbone up here. Tell me what that is, or a bright spot in the scene. It gives you a lot of creative control as opposed to the Leica M6, which is a center weighted meter, so it's more broad of a measurement. This is an 8mm spot meter. I just love a spot meter, and I was really surprised that you even saw in the video when I was shooting, I hadn't done the research yet on the meter. I had heard it was just a small dot, but I wasn't sure that it was a spot meter, and I was very excited to notice that when I was metering things out in the field with the camera. Another pro for me for sure is the viewfinder. I don't know how, but it is much brighter than my M6 for sure. And I like how the frame lines are represented in here. Of course, the M6 has 6 frame lines, so every lens you attach, there's going to be 2 sets of frame lines. More clutter, more options, right? There's 4 frame lines in the M5 opposed to the 6 in the M6, so it's less cluttered. I like how bright it is. I like how the patch itself isn't a perfect rectangle. It has rounded corners, and that really helps me transition into my subject. It just, for me, it seems to make a difference, and I appreciate that for sure. And I love on the 50mm how it has the actual side, the width of the meter itself, the spot that you'll be placing on something. I mean, it's just laser precise control. I also really like the speed selector, shutter speed selector. I didn't think I was gonna care about that much, but now that I've shot about 15 rolls through this, and whenever I pick this up and I go to change it, it's kind of a pain in the butt. Another thing I really love, speaking of shutter speed, is I like being able to see the shutter speed in the display real time. You know, one of the benefits of a rangefinder is all the information it gives you by being able to see the subject come into the scene. And for me, it's not even, you know, a lot of people say that, but for me, it's really about a clear delineation of what that scene is and what are the possibilities on the edges. So with an SLR, I'm literally like looking through blinders, right? And I don't know what the possibilities are outside. At least with a rangefinder and with a 50mm and on, I can see that I may be missing something that I may want to swing right or left and pick up. So I really love the viewfinder in this, and the shutter speed in there is key. I don't have to bring the camera down and see, am I shooting too slow? Am I gonna just totally blow the shot? And another pro definitely is what we talked about earlier, that frame lines with the 50mm. Size for me is a pro. That's gonna be a con for some people. I have large hands, like I said, so I hated the size at first, guys. I really did. But then I really appreciated it as I ran it more and more. Also, I really loved the 2 lugs on the side. And then finally, cost. So cost is a pro for me for now, right? Like you can get an older 2-lug black M5 for maybe $1,000. You can get a 3-lug chrome for maybe $1,500-$1,600. And this is, you know, the first metered Leica. If you want to get into the metered Leica film game, it's an expensive game for sure. I mean, this M6 is what, $2,500 online now. So you get in the Leica M mount body game for relatively inexpensive. But remember what I talked about earlier, less than 11,000 of these were made, and what, 23,000-ish of these were made. Once people start seeing that the M6 price is continuing to increase and they're becoming less and less obtainable, they're going to run to the M5 market. And guess what? There's not a lot of M5s out there. I would definitely say if you're considering an M5, I would go ahead and buy that now, because they are riding the wave of the M6 and being pulled up as well. So consider that. Okay, I don't really want to dwell on cons for too long, because this really is a great camera, but let's be fair and knock out some of the cons. All right, now I said size was a pro, but like I said, size is going to be a con for some people. Some people are just not going to like how large this is. It is a little heavier and it is much larger. Another con definitely is that meter arm. It scares me to think this thing moves every single time I cock the shutter and release the shutter. It's got to be prone to breakage at some point. These cameras are older than I am. Their life has to come to an end at some point. So that meter arm's a con for me. Another con for me is the meter display. I know I said I love having that shutter speed, but that meter display can be a con in that it does add more to the scene when you're looking through it. I'm a data guy. In my day job, it's all about data. So I appreciate it, but like I said earlier, if the battery were to go dead, it would be really weird to have all that down there that's just dead and doesn't work. It's just a personal thing. I think that could be a con for some people as well. Another con could be, for some people, the battery, right? We've addressed the battery issue with an adapter, the MR9, and then this guy here. So that shouldn't be too much of an issue, but one of those is expensive, right? You do have to buy something to be able to run that camera like a more modern, like a film body. Final con, for sure, is repair availability. Who will fix these? Let's say they go up to $2,000 and that meter arm breaks or something goes wrong. Who will fix that? A quick search online and there's maybe 1 or 2 people who I could find that would repair it. So that's a concern. That being said, I've run the crap out of these cameras. They feel robust and reliable. I anticipate many more years of usage out of them. The pros outweigh the cons for me personally, for sure. I'm enjoying shooting them. Now, my M6 is going off for a CLA. I'll be ready for it to come back for sure, because I do love that camera. I've definitely formed a connection with it. I can run it seamlessly, you know, with my eyes closed. I know where everything's at, and I really appreciate all of the simplicity that went into that. But I'm happy that, you know, I started having these issues and I need to send the M6 off, because it introduced me to an M5, which I was totally turned off by initially. And now that I've been forced to run one, it's an amazing camera, guys. I think at today's price point, relatively speaking to the other metered Leica offerings, fantastic value. Definitely jump on it. All right, this has been a terribly long video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed the shoot in Tempe Town Lake earlier in the video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps the channel more than you know. Absolutely consider subscribing to the channel if you like this type of content. And while you're at it, check me out on Instagram, Mac Shoots Film. Okay guys, that's it for today. See you next episode.